live from Mumbai and Brussels. It's ZN Live. And today I am very excited because I have Alice Stollmeyer, who is the Executive Director of Defend Democracy. She's got extensive experience in communication, in campaigning on some of the topics that I think everyone is talking about today: misinformation, democracy, elections. And we're going to cover a lot of this in today's discussion. She's also a Power 40 top influencer according to Politico, and she is an EU influencer according to our ranking as well. So great to have you, Alice. And I'm going to start with one question on, democracy, since this is what you're all about. We're facing an election. We're facing a massive increase, or at least discussion around misinformation. How bad do you think things are getting as we approach this election?
Well, hi, Phil, and thank you to everyone who is joining us either live or later. Thank you for having me on your show. And yes, democracy and disinformation and elections are topics close to my heart, so always happy to talk about that. How bad things are going to be, or how good, it's tough to say. Well, there's several developments. One is that foreign information manipulation and interference, or FIMI, as the European External Action Service is describing disinformation since this year, is not something that is happening only around elections. It's 24/7 and throughout the year. That's very important to realize. It's also important to realize that this information manipulation is not just about factually incorrect content, but it's also about sowing narratives, sowing division, sowing resentment against the elites or against EU institutions or against Ukraine or whatever you wanted. And sadly, especially the Kremlin, but an increasing number of other, let's say, not so democracy-friendly state actors have been sowing seeds with these narratives for many years. So by now, I think unfortunately, the Kremlin's job is becoming more easy because they don't need to come up with ever new narratives. They can just like repeat and rinse rinse and repeat the same old narratives, perhaps with some tiny variations. But they've built their audiences, they've built their platforms, they've built their networks. And partly because of the business model and the algorithms of the platforms, our societies have become increasingly polarized. So that means that a lot of content the troll factory no longer needs to make up new content. They can just amplify the people on the fringes of our own societies to kind of fan the flames of division. And the more divided we are, the weaker our cohesion and democracy will be. So this is a very, very big challenge, not just for the European elections, but for any democracy. And so we should be very aware. Perhaps one thing I would like to add, I know that everyone is talking about the AI and deepfakes and how bad that will be? Well, yes, it will be exponentially. It will make things exponentially worse. But I just want to point out that even what we're seeing now is already bad enough. We didn't need the deep fakes to have that growing polarization. And in fact, because we are human beings, psychology and our emotions are playing a very, very big role in how we process information and what we believe and what not, and how we use information, and the groups that we want to belong to or not. So it's actually, you don't need deep fakes or AI to manipulate information and to deceive people or to appeal to their prior beliefs or their emotions. Yeah, and then one thing more about this topic. Sadly, I think pretty much most of the digital platforms are actually investing less resources in content moderation, in safety of our public debate. And this is absolutely a very, very, very bad development, because we need more, not less of that.
Yeah, and we're hearing the conversation between the Commission and X, where they're saying you're not doing enough to remove fake news, especially around the war in Israel right now, and essentially we're not. Elon Musk has actually, I think I read, removed a bunch of content recently. Now, do you think that the things are going to kind of continue to amplify as we move to the election? But will that have an impact, or are we starting to get a little bit inoculated, so to speak, against that misinformation, since we've been through multiple cycles? I really, this is a very open question. What is your feeling? Do you think that can things really get that much worse than they did in the previous election cycles?
Well, I think they can, because yes, you're right. I think on the one hand, we are perhaps getting more used to so much, nonsense being out there. But the risk is that it becomes increasingly hard to spot the truthful information and to trust some sources. So it may not be so it may impact our overall belief, and it may just make us more skeptical to like any information. And I think that's maybe now becoming a bigger issue than being deceived by certain like manipulative information.
Yeah, I think we get kind of skeptical about everything because it's very hard to filter things. Now, the Commission and the Parliament are obviously gearing up for the election. You're an influencer, you have quite a big reach. What is the Parliament doing to connect with people like you, and do you think they're doing a good job at it?
Well, I'm on some sort of email list, like how to stay in touch with the European Parliament, and yes, they have this, I don't know, I can't remember if it's monthly or maybe gearing up a little towards the election, like, where they highlight some projects or campaigns or new, can be about an exposition, and some of that is interesting or relevant. But I have the feeling, I don't know. Of course, it makes sense as a campaigner or as a communications consultancy, or you want to get your message out. So you may be hoping that influencers can help you, but for that, I mean, personally, I would appreciate a more personal approach, and not think that. I mean, for me, even though, you know, as might be obvious, I deeply care about democracy. But for me, what would be the added value of just basically amplifying or boosting anyone's content? I mean, that I think my those in my network or my followers might not find that interesting, to yeah. I mean, some things are nice. Like I saw a clip recently on something like how we are all democracy, and you know, I very much agree with that message. So I might share that video clip, but yeah, I think it takes a little bit more to actually engage influencers in your campaign. Like, yeah, and so I would speaking as an influencer, I would recommend a bit more personal engagement if you really want to involve someone.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is BCW did a study recently looking at what influences the influencers and basically, you know, what other channels people are using, etc. One of the trends that I found particularly interesting is that the role of influencers, social media influencers, has grown by 16% since last year. So people recognize in Brussels that people like yourselves are playing an increasingly important role in the conversation. Now, at the same time, I think you can't put everybody in a database and just send them the same email. I think what you're talking about is really quality conversations with the right people. And I think that's difficult. And I think you know what people need to understand is that you can't just send everybody a message and say, please share my video, but more saying, look, this topic matters to you. Does it? And it's more about these conversations with much smaller groups of people that sometimes lead to something and sometimes don't necessarily get a lot of traction. And so I think you know it's harder work, I guess, for the communicators, because you have to kind of say, okay, I'm going to look at the 10, the 20 people that matter to me, and then I'm going to see how I can engage with them on something that matters to them.
Yep. So I think it's really, yes, I'm aware that this will take more time, but yes, I think it's really about building more personal relationships. I mean, I suppose that could be a way of doing it. And then but I think my feeling is that, or my prediction is that with the increasing amount of noise and synthetic content, so increasing, you know, content generated by non-humans, I have a pretty strong hunch that one thing is that people may, or communicators may, kind of diversify the platforms that they use or to reach their audiences. But I also think that as this trend will continue to move forward, I think that offline will become increasingly important.
So I mean, a lot of the people have been talking about, you know, platforms, especially X, because Elon Musk has been kind of driving the news cycle deliberately sometimes and sometimes accidentally. Now, you're obviously, you know, spending quite some time there. You heard probably during the whole EU influencer event we were discussing, people like John Worth saying they would leave X, other people saying, look, it's still there where the conversation is happening. And you know, Andrew Stroline and John Worth going quite deep into Mastodon. What's been your experience? I mean, how do you feel X is doing right now? And have you had any luck with other platforms?
Well, yeah, sadly, I couldn't attend the ZN Influencer event because, like last year, I was away in Finland for International Democracy Day. So it seems to become a tradition that I'm in Helsinki on International Democracy Day.
We will
But
check the date next year.
yeah, yeah. So of course, I've been following the slide deep down from Twitter, and I'm like absolutely not happy with what's going on. In fact, Defend Democracy has written an open letter to the European institutions in the very weekend that Elon Musk took over the platform, because we were seriously concerned, and sadly, many of our concerns are coming true, perhaps even worse than we could have ever imagined. I think what is so I am still there, but I don't know how much longer. Yes, I'm in favor of Mastodon, which I'm increasingly using. I have to say, in general, I'm just too busy to be as much online as I used to be. But what I wanted to say, oh yeah, of course. Well, I mean, the European Union is, as many of the listeners will be aware, is working to start implementing and enforcing the Digital Services Act.
Yeah.
Which means that digital platforms have to follow certain rules and regulations. Now, it doesn't seem that Mr. Elon is much inclined to give a shit about that, to excuse my French. So what I kind of fear is that, yes, I mean, it's Commissioner Breton is positioning himself as the EU's DSA enforcer, and it looks kind of cool, but I think those processes, first of all, take a lot of time. So even if after months or perhaps even years, because there will be legal procedures back and forth. So even if the end result of that is that Twitter, because I refuse to call it their new name, so if Twitter ends up paying a 6% fine, I frankly kind of expect that Elon couldn't care less. He'll just pay that and be happy to pay that as the price for owning the platform and manipulating our public debate, and who knows who even funds him. I mean, he has some funders are already a bit sketchy, so maybe he's just willing to pay that price. So I think that we need other things in parallel with regulation, because some authoritarian countries and non-state actors don't care about the rules-based order, and democracy should be aware of that and start to think about other strategies.
Yeah, and you know what we're seeing, and we've been talking about and posting about this a lot, is this fragmentation. You know, people are no longer fully committed to Twitter or to another channel, but they're starting to look across channels. I think, well, there's a kind of LinkedIn fan base, but I think that's not really solving anything because it's just committing to another platform. So I think that the real approach.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I really, honestly, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn for like professional networking purposes, but it's not a news platform. And I honestly, their algorithm is so absolutely bad. I can't believe how bad it is. It's like the most terrible algorithm I've ever seen.
Yeah, and I think that the thing is that the structure of LinkedIn obviously fulfills a completely different function
Yes.
than Twitter aimed to do. And Twitter was really, and actually in the BCW ranking, Twitter is still the only social platform that people see as a news channel. LinkedIn's
Mm,
not there. The other channels are not there in any credible way. I think
no.
LinkedIn is, a very interesting networking platform to
Yeah.
connect to people that know you, to tell stories. It's interesting, but it's fundamentally different. The architecture is very different,
Yeah.
and that's why we're seeing Blue Sky and Mastodon that are essentially copying the basic structure of Twitter, coming online. Now, I think that there's a possibility and I'm kind of that's the optimistic side, which is that we go back to an idea that we used to call Web as Hub, where you actually have your blog or your own platform, and from there you connect to different communities. So you have your content on your blog, you have your newsletter, you communicate, but then you go into LinkedIn, maybe you go to Twitter, maybe you go to Mastodon, maybe you go to different places where different conversations can happen. And in an ideal world, you could even see all the comments coming in to a central space. That's actually a conversation that I was having with people like John Worth and Matthew Laurie on LinkedIn, actually. Because that idea is being worked on by some developers who are trying to create the framework for this. But I think even if there isn't a magical framework, the idea of owning your good quality content on your own website, I think that's an idea that is actually very important now, because you realize, look, if everything you've put is on Twitter, that means if you give up on Twitter, that's all of that is gone. So,
Yeah.
so I think this idea of coming back to your own site. Andrew Stroline has built a massive email newsletter database, which again is he started this a year ago, and it's quite good now because it means he has alternative ways to communicate to his base. Are you looking into alternative channels like that for your organization?
Well, as a executive director, I have much less time for communications in general. So I think I'm more probably investing in offline communications rather than online. I can see the appeal and the reasoning behind the model that you just described. It's also perfectly aligned with what I would call resilience in general. It's about security of supply and security of demand, and the best way to guarantee that, as we can have seen with the Nord Stream 2 gas supply to Europe and other supply chain challenges, some of them caused by our non-democratic adversaries, is that diversification is always the best place to start with becoming more resilient. And
Yeah.
I want to add that what I often say when I'm speaking in panels on the link between democracy and security and on foreign interference and things, is that there's a lot of talk in security circles about critical infrastructure, like our energy pipelines and IT connections and whatnot. I always make the point that we need to start treating our digital platforms also as critical infrastructure, because they are, and we can see, Elon is able to at a whim switch on or off his Starlink satellites or the platform, and I mean he's even threatening to leave the EU or to ban EU users. So we need to be prepared.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's core to our infrastructure and to the information infrastructure that we all live in today. Now, when you meet young people who are looking for work today, what is your advice to them? What are the skills and the mindset that they most need to survive in this insane ever-changing new environment?
Well, in general, I would say try, and this may sound very softy, but try to follow your passion. Like really try to do what you love. Because by doing, even if it's as a volunteer, when you invest time in doing what you love, you will meet relevant people. You will become an expert. You will grow your network. So in general, I guess that will be my advice. And then for people wanting to make a career in the Brussels bubble, it would be go to as many events and networking events and have coffees and really make yourself seen, build connections. And it's not good enough to just stay online. And this is, I guess this is kind of in the current era that we live in. It's super important to keep exercising our social muscles, so to say, our offline social skills. So it's not good enough, even though you may be tempted to stay online because it may feel safer to sit behind your laptop or your phone, or it may seem so much easier to just send a quick message or post something, but it's not. I honestly feel that, especially in today's online environment, that's no longer good enough. You need to be out there.
Absolutely. And that's why we had a fantastic EU influencer in a beautiful venue, Spirito, of which we're sharing some footage, and there was dancing and celebrating. And of course,
I'm so sorry I missed it.
No problem. Let's make sure that we check our dates with you before next year. So now we have time for a few recommendations. So roll jingle. So Alice, you have a few recommendations for our viewers. What is it that you say they should be watching or listening to or reading?
Yes, so my first recommendation may not be directly about communication, but it is relevant. And I will hold up a book. I hope it will be visible. Hang on. Defending Democracy in an Age of Sharp Power, which is about how in the recent years, let's say, the authoritarian states are trying not only to influence our societies and democracies, but even to become increasingly sharp in their attacks. As I already mentioned, critical infrastructure. We also have cyber attacks. It's a fascinating book. It's actually precisely what my organization Defend Democracy is about. We are about defending and strengthening democracy against foreign, domestic, and technological threats. So the book is spot on, and actually I recently met the author twice, first in Washington DC and just last week in Prague. And I said, hey, actually your book is about what we as an organization are doing. So that would be a recommendation for anyone interested in democracy in the new, let's say, geopolitical context. Another recommendation I would have, and especially I hope you have some Dutch viewers or listeners, because I have two tips. One is that I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, there was a podcast with me for like almost an hour about the Brussels bubble and lobbying. I think it was a really nice conversation. So I can recommend that. We posted it, or I posted it on LinkedIn and Twitter and Mastodon, I think. And this Monday, one of the biggest influencers of the Netherlands, his name is Sander Schimmelpenninck, will start a 4-episode documentary TV series on national Dutch TV. It's on Monday evening, just after 9. And the theme of this new series is social media. So for communications folks who understand Dutch, it's very much worth watching. I will also be in one of the episodes. Do I have any? Oh yeah. There was one new movie or documentary. I haven't seen it yet. I've actually been in touch with the team that made it. But there's a documentary called The YouTube Effect. I think it will be fascinating. I'd love to watch. I think it might actually be nice if perhaps the European Parliament would organize an event and invite the documentary makers and organize a debate after, and perhaps Defend Democracy could be involved in the panel debate. So do you have any recommendations, Philip?
I do, and they link up to a lot of what you said. Actually, this is a book I picked up a few weeks ago called Outrage Machine, and it really talks about everything we touched on today and how social media platforms were developed to build and amplify outrage. And it's really interesting because he goes deep into the analysis of what triggers a response. Why do we get attracted to something that makes us angry? And then we want to share it, and then it makes somebody else angry, and it creates a viral loop, and everybody goes insane. But that feeds the beast, that feeds the platforms. Now, of course, it's human psychology, and it works on other channels too. But social media channels amplify that to a degree that we haven't seen before. And I wasn't sure. I mean, I like the cover. I think it's very cool, but I wasn't sure, how much you can say that hasn't been said already. But he's managed to really do some analysis of different models and how they connect and why something creates a spiral. And also, I think how we can start thinking about, reversing that process, because there are ways to start saying you don't want to push specific outrage as a viral content. And I again, I'm an optimist. I think that it's possible to have very constructive conversations on social media. And I think, we've seen a lot of that in the EU bubble. We've seen people having very deep, technical, specific conversations without hating on each other. So I believe that there is a real role for this online, but we need, and I think, the more there is conflict and the more there is polarization, the worse this outrage becomes. And we've seen it with the conflict now in Israel, where opinions are so charged that essentially anything anyone says creates a massive response, and anyone who disagrees is, immediately hates the person who expresses the opinion. So it's created this incredible space in which you can't have a discussion without it being incredibly difficult and challenging. And yet, you need to sit down and find solutions, or then, nobody talks, and things are pretty terrible. So I would strongly recommend that.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting, because I happen to have studied psychology. So I'm a psychologist is my background. And given that my knowledge of psychology and digital platforms, Defend Democracy has actually developed a training called Act on Disinfo, which, unlike most other trainings, is not about fact-checking or media literacy or digital literacy, but it's about what we call digital mindfulness. And this is precisely because we know that both the algorithms of the platforms, but also the foreign propagandists are precisely targeting our emotions and our outrage. And these go hand in hand. So the foreign interference and the platform business model go hand in hand. And that's why we need to connect the dots. And so the training is really about, because what happens is that your emotions are triggered before your brain, your rational part of the brain, can even think about, oh wait, is this actually true, or where can I verify the source? And so the main, I would say, advice of the whole training, or kind of how I can sum it up, is whenever you feel emotionally triggered or outraged, stop and step back. Don't act on your emotions. Just take time, step back, and then, only then, there's a lot of very, very practical tips and tricks, from my more than 10 years or as a digital advocate and practitioner, that have some three underlying principles is don't feed the trolls, don't feed the algorithms, and don't feed the brains. And nice. For everyone who wants to know more, visit our website.
Fantastic. We will use that. There is a chapter actually with all the psychological models that are applied to this specific area. So it's quite nicely researched. And I was actually talking earlier today to Angus Thompson, who's done some behavioral psychology training for vaccination communication. So that's specifically what drives people to understand vaccines and what creates fear and what models can you apply. So very, very interesting topics. We will continue this conversation online and hopefully when we meet again, but that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for your insights. It's been fantastic having you. See you soon and see you online. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.